Quite some time ago, a bunch of viewers on the channel started asking me about Ultraviolet Grasslands. This is Ultraviolet Grasslands and the Black City, and this is the author of it. It took me a while to purchase the book, and then when I got it, I started playing a game out of it pretty much right away and filming it, and I took it with me on vacation, and that was a mistake, and that film was lost. And it then took me just until now to really get back to it and overcome the how I feel about all the work that I did that got lost. In any case, that is a background just to say that just get this book. If you're a solo role player, just get this book and sit down and start reading it. Really, as the title to my video says, this is, in a sense, it could be like a textbook for a solo RPGer. In this video, we're going to go over the reasons that I think that, and perhaps in another video, I will get back to playing out or replaying the game. I still have my 3 characters that I made for that game and some notes about what was going on there, so perhaps we'll get to it. But in this video, I really just want to talk about what is in this book, which is mostly a setting, by the way. It is a rule set, but the majority of the book is, about this much is a setting, and maybe this much is rules, and then there is supporting material here. And we're going to talk all about that and why that makes this as if it were a solo RPG rule set, because I really believe that if you have this book in hand and some random tables, perhaps even outside of this book, and some concept of solo roleplay from like my solo GM guide or this channel, you're all set. So, Ultraviolet Grasslands and the Black City, psychedelic metal role-playing. The publication credits are here, again, with the designer's name, and we'll note here also the credits here to be shown. There's a dedication here to the designer's father who passed away when he was writing the book, and he mentions this in the acknowledgments, and he said that he mentioned that, saying that this book finally helped his father understand what art means to him, and that was good enough. And this really very much is an artistic creation, and artistic in the sense of not only verbally artistic, as you'll see it very much is, but obviously visually artistic as well. It's an oversized paperback, at least the version I have. I don't know if it comes in hardback or cloth form. I got this from the Exalted funeral website. I don't know if it is still available there. I'm going to put up the link, the best link that I can find for it, down below in the video, at least as of this filming. And we'll just read a moment to see what the designer has to say about his own work. You have in your hands a role-playing adventure setting, so a key. This is mostly a setting book designed to help a traditional RPG referee take their friends' heroes on a long, strange trip across a mythic steppe filled with remnants of space and time and fuzzy riffs. It is inspired by psychedelic heavy metal, the Dying Earth genre, and Oregon Trail games. The first 2/3 of the book cover 32 strange locations scattered from east, which is the Violet City, to west, the Black City, becoming progressively stranger as the journey continues. I have presented them first and in sequence for easier reference during campaign play. There is a map in the back of the book that we may take a look at quickly that has all the places on it. It's somewhere, but the presentation is as the designer says. The last section of the book covers general information for running games in the setting, maps, factions, equipment, trading goods, a history generator, so there's a lot of random tables there, as well as a glossary. And then in the center, you can see it's only pages 133 to 155, is a section explaining some rules. And final note, I've also tried to design the UVG to resist repetition and canon, so I encourage you to make it your own, to use the parts you like, and have an incredible and unique adventure with your friends. And this is very much unique. So what we're going to do in this video, for the purposes of my presentation of the material, is we are actually going to skip the main part of it initially, just so I can orient you a little bit with the rules and why they are so flexible and so useful for the soloist. In the book, though, in the setting part, there are these boxed, sort of lavender boxed areas that also present some rules. So some of the rules are presented a little bit in a little bit scattered way alongside this just absolutely stunning art. And then the settings take up the bulk of the book. But we are going to skip ahead right now to quickly go over the rules and then turn to the supporting materials. And then lastly, we will get back to the settings. Now, this is not a solo designed book, so the rules start by addressing the referee and giving them, allowing them to roll up a name for themselves and giving the GM or the referee some sort of character and special power. So I'm not really sure I've seen this before. It's a D12 option that is specifically directing the referee to do something like open a travel portal for heroes once per session, demand sacrifices at will, or draw an abandoned railroad on the big map and have it linking to places. That is an option for the characters. One thing I'll say about this, and we'll just take a quick look at the map if I can find it, is that one of the reasons why this works so well for soloists is that there is an understated emphasis, not even understated because he talks about it a little bit, on using aspects of board gaming, like almost like a sequence of play, to structure sessions. And that's something I talk about in the Solo GM Guide as a tool for soloists that can help move things along and can be a foundation to fall back on if sessions start to stall. And we'll see how this plays out in this setting. But even the concept of the map and having a railroad that can take you from one place to another. So this is the extent of the map here. You can see how things are connected and can choose to follow it or not. It's not terribly detailed, but it does give you the indications of how things are connected to each other. All right. So the rules for the individual characters themselves. Bottom line is it's a D20 system, and you are taking your D20 roll, some stat that you have, as well as some skill value, and you're doing a roll, and you're trying to roll over a target number. So examples of target, basically like a difficulty test, are these. So if something's trivial, you would have to roll over 3. So that's probably not something you would even do a roll for. Moderate is 11, difficult 15, extreme is 19. Only use tests when they make sense, when outcomes make a meaningful difference. And it says sometimes you'll spot the phrase relevant test. That means the hero can use any combination of stat and skill that makes narrative sense. And as we get into this, you'll see there's a lot of built-in choice for the player in terms of what they might be using. And this also works very well as the soloist because it allows you to factor in some randomness with and sort of tense unknowing with the D20 roll, but still lets you play the character that you've created in the world by using stats and skills that they have. We have rolling for advantage and disadvantage, etc. The 6 stats are strength, endurance, agility, charisma, aura, and thought. And the abilities we will see listed the skills. So there's a list here of possible skills, and there's 40 of them. There are a couple of D40 tables here, so you have to sort of figure out on your own how you're going to manage rolling a D40 table. It is also suggested that you could create your own skills. So you can make up skills and give your hero skills at the outset. It's also clear that any hero can attempt any task. You just don't add a skill value, and then you have to roll with disadvantage. So if you're playing a lone hero and you want to, say, pick a lock on something, maybe you would roll agility and roll that at disadvantage with no add-on to see if you could do that. So it represents your being able to do something, but just not great at it. Some of the skills here give you a flavor for the world. You have crystal healing, use placebo effects to your advantage, focus magic, navigation, find your way by stars and winds and waypoints, protocol, coffee ceremonies, modes of address, titles, and such. There are cities in this world. There is a sense of, I don't want to say royalty, but there are instances where you would be interacting in a sort of social strata, so that could be helpful. Old tech, using long ago techno magic. Legume farming, growing beans. You could have comedy as a skill, bring joy, laughter, and inappropriate sounds. Tactics, find and use strategic advantages for war or business. You could have a skill that is called simply the war, which is a history skill using ancient war machines. So a variety of different things. You could choose to roll randomly on that to give your character flavor, or you could choose them yourself depending on what type of character you wanted to make. There are also things called abilities. These are weird or unnatural abilities, things a normal human shouldn't be capable of. They're mutations and other weird things. They can provide advantage in a specific situation, and they also have disadvantage here. So there's a D20 table of these, and they come with sort of bad stuff, weird stuff, or heroic stuff that you can choose, such as gaining on an initiative, or carrying twice as much as a normal human, or your muscles growing slimmer or bulkier, and eventually this becoming extreme. You could have an additional eye or teeth growing somewhere odd. The eye is functional. Now, magic in the system, everybody can have magic and cast spells. It says magic rips reality, imposing otherworldly wrongness on the mundane. This means that spells hurt to cast, and heroes have to pay the spell price in life. And there is a formula for how much it costs to cast a spell. You will find spells in the world, and there is you carry them, and they take up inventory slots. Sometimes you'll find a spell in the world. Sometimes you can learn a spell if you are a wizard by studying them, discovering them, and studying them. And it takes a week study and a moderate thought test. But other options exist, from direct magical injection to longer private schools that obviate the need for tests. So this is a rule that if you want to make your character magical, you would just give your character some spells, as I believe I did when I started. And there's a suggestion. There is a table here in the back of some sample spells. So there's a synopsis of spells here in the back, and there's quite a few of them. They each have a power level in terms of how much they cost to cast, and they're also referenced as to where they show up in the worlds here, because they're all somewhere in the setting book. You will come across a spell or gain a spell, and then it is explained here. And as mentioned, how strongly you choose to cast the spell makes a difference in this. So, for example, let the door open itself. You could open a nearby object, or a faraway object, or a faraway locked object, or a faraway sealed object, depending on how much power you put into the casting of that spell. Ultimately, the richest thing about the character development is at the beginning of the book. We saw it briefly at the outset of the video, but I kind of skipped over it because it is really point number one about why this book is like a textbook for solo RPG. And it is because of this, that when you are creating a hero at the outset on page 7, even before you get into the rules for the character creation, you can roll on this D40 table to find out who you are, why you're on the road, and what you are starting out with. And the examples that you could get are so evocative of putting together a story. So in my case, I did the random roll and I got an exiled Bluelander noble who became Yakko the Witch. I got an exiled pirate liberal who became Tesna the musician. And I got an anthropologist who was Mazaria the engineer. And I got all that just from the random rolls. So I had a noble person, a witch, and an engineer to start out. And that became the foundation of what I made up as a story because I put them into one of the environments. You, for example, could get a wine vampire priest, and you could either go straight across or obviously roll a bunch of different times, bearing a princess pearl for a princess. That's why they are on the road. And they start out with a crystal personality box to create some zombies. Or a tumult fisher wizard who's seeking allies for a revolution and has a gourd fetish with cowrie teeth. Or a moon mountain witch pursued by furies and a dark fate who's carrying a lime green onion and skull cup. So the offerings here as to who the hero is before you even get into putting them together with stats is in line with having a foundational narrative based on your people. And of course you have things like things that you can purchase and equipment and things like that, definitely. But the core of the character is a narrative description, and that is extremely useful, especially for solo play where you are acting both as the GM and the player. Now, what else did I want to say about the rules per se? I think we've covered mostly everything. There's an example of the character sheet here. This is going to get into sort of, I think, point 2 about why this is a great book to serve almost as a solo RPG textbook. And that is, it's very easy with the rules here to gamify the session or the play that you do. And this is something I talk about in my solo GM guide a lot as a mindset of the solo GM, which is to not forget the G in RPG, meaning that this is a role-playing game, and the structures of board games can be useful in solo RPG play in a way that they might be seen as intrusive or inappropriate in a traditional TTRPG where the concept of something having like a sequence of play with a bunch of people sitting around with the GM would seem to be the wrong idea. But for the soloist, it can be useful. And one example of what this book provides to aid in that utility is here. This is the section on combat rules. We're not going to go into the combat rules per se. However, I do want to show you that there is a list of actions here that can be taken on a turn. And the author even says, I know this isn't typical for a role-playing game to delineate these types of actions. What I did when I was doing my play was to go through these actions and create my own random table based on the suggestions of what was here such that I did a D20 table just for combat, so that when I was having combat, I would roll on this table essentially to get the reaction of the enemy if it seemed appropriate that there would be an unknown action at that point. And I chose things from this table. This table actually has 25 options, and I eliminated some of them, like drag away an ally, for example. But having things like chug a potion, if you rolled up something like that in combat as playing solo, then all of a sudden you'd have to be deciding like, okay, well, what potion? Where did you get the potion? And it just added an element of surprise in a way, or randomness, or something a little bit unusual. But the structure for all of that was right here. But that's not the only way and place in this book that you get things upon which you can base a type of sequence of play, or, for lack of a better word, procedure. And you can see here what I based my own sequence of play on are the rules here for what is suggested that you can do every week of travel. That has to do with checking your supplies, misfortune, encounters, etc., and modify that to happen not just every week, but every day or whatever. So that structure is supported here. And again, the concept of kind of like a sequence of play, that when you're stopped, it gives you the options of things you can do, very much like you would see in a board game rule set. For each travel week, I did roll on the general travel, misfortune, and misery table. There is a supply and ration rules in the book, and starvation and thirst, and I built into my sequence of play that I needed to check those supplies and then do my misfortune test. And my misfortune test was sort of a charisma roll here, as they have it here, to see what you are going to have happen. So depending on the success level of the test, you can have things basically like nothing happen. You're just traveling along and being bored, something good happening, or something terrible happening, like the flood is washing away the road. And then I made a way to check for what would happen as an encounter, what would happen when I arrived at the destination, would I discover something? And when we get into the actual descriptions of the places, you'll see that there are, in various places, things that you can discover, things that you can encounter. But in the way that I put it together, you needed to check to see if you would discover something. So there was that element of it, as I said, like a game sequence of play of things to do. And other options that you could do, like you had to forage, or you could try to recover something that had broken down. So I gave myself this structure of play, and everything was drawn from the materials here. It is not spelled out in the book that you need to do that, but the rules do support it. So, for example, this is the discovery test here. That is, the relevant test is usually your thought attribute, where you are rolling to do that test and then see what happens. Either nothing interesting nearby, but you need to roll next encounter check with disadvantage, for example. Could be dust and haze and broken dreams, that's all. Or you could say, in the silences, in the gaps in conversation, in the forgotten words, there is a map. You get 2 discoveries. Where is the discovery? And there's a D6 table here for where that is. Again, the foraging, there's a test built in there to see what you get, and if you're starving, how to do a test against the starvation. Materials are here in the book for you. I put them together in some type of sequence for something that I was going to repeatedly do as I played my game out, as I had my session. And I think that is super helpful when you are on your own. Now, I will say that we turn to this caravan. There are certain things I omitted in the book entirely, and Caravans was one of them. There's an entire, you're traveling through this world, so there are rules and indeed an entire caravan sheet to fill out to indicate sort of how you're traveling, whether it's a mount or a motor or something magical, and all manner of things about it. And then they give some examples of the speed and its capacity and the inventory. In my world, in my play, I just kind of magically traveled. I decided to omit that, but that is there for you, and it is worth mentioning for those who are interested in that, because there are indications here on the map as well, and this is very helpful in terms of the sequence of play being based on each travel week. That the map will tell you if you're going from the Porcelain Citadel to the Steppe of the Lime Nomads, it takes 1 week. Now, in my game, that meant 1 check for the 1 week. In another person's game, if you had the caravan, you could factor in the use of the fuel or how much it costs or whatever you were working with the caravan. I didn't do that, as I said, and the game allows for that type of, it's forgiving in that way. And not everything is going to be 1 week. Some things are going to be taking 2 weeks. So you'll be having the checks to do between way stations. So all of that structure is extremely supportive for creating, as you read through the book and working out what you want to do. Maybe you don't want to use the foraging rules. Maybe you don't want to use encumbrance. Maybe you don't want to use caravan, as I didn't. But creating some type of sequence of play to go through as you maneuver between places. And then now we're going to get to talking about the meat of this setting, which are the places. And this is point number 2 about why this is just so awesome as a textbook for the solo RPGer, which has to do with the amazing locales and how they are all delineated. Every one of them has various types of random tables and tons of narrative about what it is. I just opened randomly here to something I haven't actually looked at this before. Deeper in the heart, the warm mantle. The mantle of the near moon is still alive. Actually, this is part of a larger description of the near moon. So this is just one section. This is almost like a kind of dungeon with different levels that's very, very clearly delineated, and there's many pages devoted to it, but we're just looking at one right here, the inner portion. The mantle of the near moon is still alive, 100 meters thick layer of fleshy void organism with crystal endoskeletal planes, pillars, struts, and spines, and exoskeletal plates of nickel iron compacted by the coagulated dust and boulders of the crust. The massive creature moans and trembles, surviving on the heat from the nuclear fires of the core, tortured by the stuck force lines that thread and shear and tramp it. So we have a listing here, a D8 table of encounters that you could have, passages that you could go through, chambers. So again, it is like a kind of dungeon area. And the things that you will be getting are something like a blubber swaddled crevasse between flesh and crystal masses. This is like you're in this creature here. Or you could go in the processing organs, pumping vessels, great valves, and strange gelatinoids area. And a gelatinoid is going to be an enemy that you will encounter. There are discoveries that you can encounter, and they are, as you can just see here, even if I don't read it, you can see the massive number of the detail that is given. So the core here is an enormous assemblage of rotating, grinding, tearing crystalline mouth structures arranged like wheels within wheels, plates arising around plates, extending like a proboscis over 50 meters deep into the core, where it ends in an abrupt and gory, if fossilized, bisection. So it is very evocative. It is very, no one shies away from a detailed description. And we can go even further in here into the crystal core. So there's crystallized artifacts you could find. And again, we have the passages and chambers of the core and more description of discoveries that you could make. So that's one example of a type of setting that is here. And here is something, this is the Iron Road. This is something quite different. This is described as a series of mammoth skeletal iron towers, red and rusting, like an army of giants marching in the sunset. They continue for more than a week's walking, and Spectrum scholars claim that in the long ago, cable wagons flew from one tower to the next, simulating the flight of an eagle or golden sky barge. There's a specific, as you're walking here, there's a specific misfortune on the Iron Road test that you do as you're going: wind, sadness, desperate ends, and a degenerate posthumans. So you can do a test here to see what happens as you travel through it. And then just something totally different, like the setting, the Violet City. So we do have our misfortune. We have encounters and travel options to go away from there. We also have a list of encounters in the streets. And a Violet City carousing table. There's drugs in this city, hiring help in the city. So this is a whole world that you could go through. There's dining establishments, just tons of randomness for you in completely different types of settings. And then you move from the city into an exterior area where there are prairie dogs, and you're on the road, and misfortunes, and how you could travel on the road and what you could discover. So just the variety of the options for settings is amazing. This is a random gate here. What is it? What's it made of? Who made it? What happened to it? Where does it lead? So you could simply work your way through the book and work your way through so many of these tables to what condition is it in? Where does it actually go? To play out a story in that way and let the book lead you if you wanted to do that, because that is how rich the material is. So with all of these settings, the final thing that is my point about why this is such a great solo RPG textbook is the supporting random tables that you have to help you work your way through these incredible settings to come up with something to do and a way to have the environment sort of reacting back to you. So you have a bunch of random tables in the back here, and some of them are beginning, if you want to do this, to create the history of whatever you are playing in, the world you're playing in. You have tons of tables about rolling on what happened in the distant past or the dim past. Again, this would be context. Maybe it could be related to your story. You could decide, or you could just avoid this altogether. But the fact that it's here is super helpful. There's even a D12 table about oral histories and what people might have passed down from generation to generation. A table of discoveries here, and if you're just wandering through, say, on that road and you wanted to discover something, you could roll up something that had a function, what it appeared like, what shape it was, who made it even. And there's a whole table of historic periods and styles. You can do weather as well, and you could decide yourself whether you were going to include this in perhaps your little sequence of play here. I don't think I did that when I was playing, but you could do that, and then you could decide whether there was a mechanical effect of anything to do with the weather, or even the scenery for that matter. Or you could just roll on this for flavor and theme. Now, these tables here, this structure here of giving a reason to go into the Ultraviolet Grasslands for trade, if you wanted to, you could set up an entire trading system, or you could build a trading route into your story as to why you were doing that. And there is a whole table here about what the trade good is and what its use is for, where you can find it, and perhaps where you could bring it. So you could start out, if you wanted to, by just creating some characters and putting them in a place with this item and having them go somewhere and do something, and that could be the origin of your story. There is a deal making and haggling table, so you could roll on that to see what happened when you traded, and also the market research table to, if you were searching for things to trade. The trade routes here also could be used, again, for actual trading or just the flavor of what will happen when you are going from on route to route. There's a safe route table, a profitable route table, and an aggressive or illegal route table. And trade obstacles, a D12 table. Again, this could be used in a story that was actually about trading, or just as a seed starter for some other story that you were going to run if you had to deal with a bureaucrat, for example, or a customs person, or a duke. So these tables that flesh out the rest of the world give even more foundation for placing your character in a world and having something for them to do, and having a jumping off point for them to do. And the final thing I want to point out, I skipped over this, you've seen it in the video, I wanted to just show it last, is the D100 table here of trinkets. And if you watch my channel or you've read my book, you know that I think trinkets can be incredibly important in even the entire foundation of a solo session, that rolling on a trinket table and assigning a trinket to a character can really send that character in a particular direction. Now, I've got so much stuff here with these characters, I can't remember which is their actual trinket that I got here. But for example, if you have Yakko the Witch, who's an exiled Bluelander noble, so a noble witch is one of my characters. Let's just give her a trinket and see how we would use that to tell something about her as a story element. And I will, let's see, take this opportunity to show off. This is the dice holder, the tower dice holder that one of my kids made for me that I think is so cool. All right, let's just do a trinket roll here we're going to give her another trinket, Yakko the Witch, this exiled Bluelander noble, 63, a chitin bustier with secret stash and a treacherous love letter or tourmaline spheres. So I would take this, I would focus on this treacherous love letter and say perhaps this Yakko the Witch, this exiled Bluelander noble, perhaps she was exiled because she had a clandestine romance with somebody, we don't know, perhaps from an opposing faction in this world, another noble from an opposing faction, and she was exiled because of that, and she's carrying this letter with her. There is somewhere in here, here we go, factions. You could then, from that, and I probably would, go through and figure out, well, where was she from? Now, this wasn't something that I did in my play, but rolling up that trinket would have me do that. What was she part of? And play that out using some of the random tables here and see if that gave me something to do with or a way to create a story or a mission or a reason for going through the world. Now we have Tessana the musician here. He or she is an exiled pirate liberal. I don't know, this is kind of like a fighter with swords and gun running and things of that nature. If we gave them a trinket, let's see what we could work out there. That's 73. 73 here is It's a shield with biochemical snakes woven into the boss, or scroll cases filled with arcane weather poetry. So I think I would go with the scrolls and the weather poetry. And this is a musician, like a bard character. So a bard fighter character. So I would perhaps create a spell to go with this character, give this character, I don't think this character actually had any spells, but I would give a character that spell and build it out. And again, the philosophy and the approach of this book is that you can reimagine or imagine for yourself what might be in this world. So you could go to the synopsis of spells and see if there is something that is already a fit, that is like a weather kind of spell, or you could just make up a spell on your own, remembering to give it the various power options in terms of casting. So that is, well, let's do my last character here. Now, what story would I create for them? Oh, this is my engineer, right? The anthropologist. So I have an engineer anthropologist also carrying a prohibited radiation gun from long, long ago, or a bimannerous porcelain vase set. Well, I would go with the prohibited gun from long, long ago. And this engineer who's carrying the gun from long, long ago, I might go back to the section here with the random tables on the history of the place and see if I could roll up some idea about what happened long, long ago, and wondering, why does this engineer have that? Does the engineer need to return it to some place where they got it from? Are they seeking more of that? So you could decide to roll on one of these history, the forgotten time, any of these really, maybe not dimly remembered, long, long ago, might be forgotten times. So roll on this D12 table of forgotten times to see if whatever you got somehow could be part of the history of your engineer. So in this case, the primordial era ended with the war of lings and vials and the rising of the great mist. So, sorry about that. So that this is a relic of that war, and perhaps you could then decide what it actually meant in that war. Was it of significance in some way? Is that connected to the other characters in your party? And if so, how is that going to relate to what you're doing here? Maybe, or maybe not. But the point is that this is a potentially rich table. Ditto the final thing. I know I said the other thing was the final thing, but this is a D100 table of NPCs that you could roll on at any point, obviously, or at the outset. 71 is a reaver, and it's a friendly murder hobo, has a map to a treasure buried under an orphanage, and there's a keyword here, childhood. So, you could decide if you encountered them, maybe that was somebody knew in their childhood. Here's an inquisitor. He's languid, naturally relaxed and unstressed, and the keyword there is wealth. Maybe that is somebody from one of the nobles past. I think that was a 97. Here's another witch. Oh, this is Yako the witch. I think I got my character's name from this thing. I must have. She is a kleptomaniac, also cursed to degenerate into a vicious beast. And a vicious beast is an enemy with a stat here. And the keyword there is meditation. And we'll just do one more. 20 is a dilettante. This is Arena de Serpens, a grimly nice person, whiny and needful, though genuinely skilled. And her keyword is despair. So you could decide, I didn't do this in my sequence of play, but you could decide that every now and again you would do a test to see if you encountered someone, and then if you did, build them into your story somehow, or ask questions about how they fit into your story. I mean, really, it's hard not to feel like I've missed out on telling you a lot about this book, even though I've been talking for almost an hour. Ultraviolet Grasslands. and the Black City, psychedelic metal role-playing. This setting, this book, this presentation of material is something I can't recommend highly enough for the reasons that I said. It functions almost as a solo RPG textbook. If you just sat down and read it straight through, you would learn so much about environment, the use of random tables, the use of board game type of sequence of play and structures of things to do in an adventure game that can help your solo play, and just the effective use of beautiful art and layout and the physical aspect of the book that makes it so inviting and so engaging as the soloist. And I'm sure there are things that I'm not mentioning. Obviously, I can't read you this entire book, but hopefully this has given enough of a sense, like even just going from this area of this plains, the gall grass, and all that might be in here that you can just get a sense of from the illustration to the very next page, which is the ruin of the 3 sticks, really gives a sense of exploration and how this is in many ways just an adventure game, an adventure board game in book form. And as the soloist, using the approaches of the solo GM, the solo player, you can really make that come to life.